Indian billionaire is left paralyzed when he sees his new housekeeper's necklace. It was the same one his great love wore when she disappeared many years ago. Welcome to Billionaires and Hearts. Before we dive into today's emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to stay updated. We'd love to hear your first impressions, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think as you watch. And if you enjoy our stories, please like and share this video with your friends. Now let's get started. Ian Marshall stood frozen in his study, the crystal tumbler slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. But he didn't hear the crash. His entire world had narrowed to a single point, the delicate silver necklace hanging from his new housekeeper's neck as she bent to clean the fireplace. The pendant, a small, intricately carved lotus flower with a tiny pearl at its center, was identical to the one he had given Maria all those years ago. The one she had been wearing the day she disappeared without a trace. Sir, are you all right?" Helen's voice seemed to come from far away. She had straightened up, concern etched on her features as she watched her normally composed employer sway slightly on his feet. Ian couldn't speak. His eyes remained fixed on the necklace, memories flooding back with such force they nearly brought him to his knees. The way Maria's eyes had lit up when he gave it to her, how she'd insisted on wearing it every day, even though it was far too modest for someone of her social standing. The way it had caught the light the last time he saw her, before she walked out of his parents' estate and vanished from his life forever. "The necklace," he finally managed to whisper, his voice hoarse. "Where did you get it?" Helen's hand flew to her throat, fingers curling protectively around the pendant. "This? I've had it since I was a child. My mother gave it to me before she passed away." Ian's legs could no longer support him. He sank into his leather armchair, his mind racing. Could it be possible? After all these years, could this simple piece of jewelry be the key to unlocking the mystery that had haunted him for so long? He studied Helen more carefully now. She was nothing like Maria. Where Maria had been all fire and passion, Helen was quiet efficiency. But there was something in the way she held herself, a certain grace that seemed familiar. "Your mother," Ian said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "What was her name?" Helen hesitated, and for a moment, Ian saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. But before she could answer, Xavier, Ian's personal assistant, burst into the study. "Sir, the board members have arrived early for the meeting. They're waiting in the conference room." Ian wanted to dismiss them all, to demand answers from Helen right then and there, but years of discipline won out. He rose slowly, straightening his jacket. "We'll continue this conversation later," he told Helen, who nodded quickly and began gathering her cleaning supplies. As she hurried from the room, Ian couldn't help but notice how tightly she clutched the necklace, as if afraid it might be taken from her. That evening, alone in his study, Ian pulled out the old photograph he kept locked in his desk drawer. Maria smiled up at him, young and beautiful, the silver lotus pendant gleaming at her throat. The same pendant he had seen today, on a woman who claimed it was a childhood gift from her mother. Nothing about this made sense. Maria had disappeared without a trace, despite all his efforts to find her. Private investigators, police searches, rewards offered. Nothing had revealed what happened to her. His parents had eventually convinced him to move on, to focus on the family business, to make a suitable match with someone from their social circle. He had done what was expected of him, but he had never forgotten, and now, after all this time, this coincidence, if it was a coincidence, had walked right into his home. As Ian stared at the photograph, one thought kept circling in his mind. Either Helen was somehow connected to Maria, or someone was playing a cruel game. Either way, he would find out the truth, no matter the cost. What he didn't know was that Helen was at that very moment making a phone call from her modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, her hands shaking as she dialed a number she had memorized long ago. "Mother," she whispered when the call was answered. He recognized the necklace. "What do I do now?" The evening air was thick with tension as Helen paced her small apartment, the phone still warm in her trembling hands. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Keep working. Act normal. Don't let him know anything yet." But how could she act normal when her employer's penetrating gaze seemed to follow her everywhere? Since the incident with the necklace, Ian Marshall's behavior had changed dramatically. Where before he had barely noticed her presence as she went about her duties, now she could feel him watching her constantly, studying her every move as if searching for something or someone in her features. Helen paused before the mirror hanging in her modest living room, touching the silver lotus pendant that had caused such upheaval. In the reflection, she saw what she always saw, a simple woman with careful movements and quiet determination. But now she found herself wondering what Ian saw when he looked at her. Did he see traces of Maria in her face? The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. The next morning, Helen arrived at the Marshall mansion earlier than usual, hoping to complete her duties before Ian emerged from his wing of the house. The mansion was quiet, still wrapped in the grey light of dawn. As she moved through the grand hallways with their gleaming wooden panels and priceless artwork, she couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this world of wealth and privilege. But as she approached the study, she heard voices. Ian's deep timbre was immediately recognizable, but it was the other voice that made her freeze mid-step. "You need to let this go, Ian," Xavier was saying, his tone urgent and concerned. "We both know what happened when you became obsessed with finding Maria before. The company nearly suffered for it. Your health suffered for it." "This is different," Ian replied, and Helen could hear the tension in his voice. "That necklace, it's exactly the same, Xavier. Not similar, not a copy. The exact same piece I had custom-made for Maria. The lotus petals have the same tiny imperfection on the left side where the silversmith's hand slipped. It's her necklace. And what are you suggesting? That your housekeeper somehow stole it?" No. There's more to this. Helen said it was from her mother." There was a heavy silence, and Helen found herself holding her breath. "Ian," Xavier's voice was gentler now, "Maria disappeared years ago. The police investigation found nothing. The private investigators found nothing. Sometimes we have to accept that we'll never know the truth. The truth is standing right in front of me, wearing Maria's necklace around her neck, and I will not ignore it this time." Helen backed away quietly, her heart pounding. She needed to warn her mother, but she couldn't leave now. It would look too suspicious. Instead, she retreated to the kitchen and began her morning routine with trembling hands, trying to appear normal while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Throughout the morning, Helen felt the weight of unspoken questions growing heavier. As she dusted the library shelves, she could sense Ian's presence even before he entered the room. He stood in the doorway, watching her work, and she waited for the questions she knew would come. "Son Helen," his voice was soft but firm, "I think it's time we had that conversation about your necklace." She turned slowly, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "Of course, sir." Ian gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "Please, sit." It felt wrong, sitting in such an expensive chair while in her work clothes, but Helen complied. Ian took the seat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me about your mother," he said. Helen had prepared for this, had rehearsed the story countless times, but now that the moment had come, the words felt like ashes in her mouth. "There isn't much to tell, sir. She raised me alone, worked hard to give me an education. She's living quietly now in a small town up north. And your father? I never knew him." Ian leaned forward slightly. "The necklace? Your mother told you it was a gift." "Yes, sir. She gave it to me when I was young, said it was precious to her, that I should always keep it safe." Helen's fingers automatically went to the pendant, a gesture Ian's sharp eyes didn't miss. "Would you mind if I looked at it more closely?" This was the moment Helen had been dreading. Slowly, her fingers trembling slightly, she reached behind her neck to undo the clasp. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect this precious piece that connected her to a past she barely understood. But she knew refusing would only make things worse. She placed the necklace in Ian's outstretched hand, watching as he examined it with intense concentration. His fingers traced the lotus petals, lingered over the tiny pearl at its center, and then found the almost imperceptible flaw on the left side that he had mentioned to Xavier. "This necklace," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "was made by a silversmith in London. I designed it myself, had it custom made for someone very special." He looked up at Helen, his eyes searching her face. Someone who disappeared many years ago. Helen felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. Perhaps it's just very similar to... No, Ian cut her off gently. This is the same necklace. I would stake my life on it. He held it up, letting it catch the light. The question is, Helen, how did your mother come to possess it? Before Helen could respond, they were interrupted by the sharp ring of Ian's phone. He answered it with obvious irritation, but his expression quickly changed to one of concern. I'll be right there, he said tersely, ending the call. He looked at Helen, clearly torn between his desire for answers and whatever emergency awaited him. We're not finished with this conversation, he said, carefully handing the necklace back to her. Please don't leave the house today. I need to know more. As soon as Ian left the room, Helen fumbled with her own phone, her fingers shaking as she typed out a message. Mother, he knows about the necklace. He knows everything about it. What do I do? The response came almost immediately. Stay calm. I'm coming. Helen stared at those 3 words with a mixture of relief and dread. Her mother had always warned her this day might come, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. As she clasped the necklace back around her neck, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for the truth herself. In his car, racing toward the office to deal with an unexpected crisis, Ian's mind was far from business matters. The image of Helen's face as she handed him the necklace kept replaying in his thoughts. There had been fear there, yes, but something else too, a sadness, a longing that seemed too deep for someone simply caught in an awkward situation with her employer. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Oliver, I need you to do some research. Find out everything you can about Helen Parker and her mother. Everything. As the city rushed past his window, Ian felt the familiar surge of determination that had driven him during those first desperate months after Maria's disappearance. But this time, he wouldn't let the trail go cold. This time, he would find the truth, no matter where it led. What he didn't know was that the truth was already on its way to his door, carried by a woman who had spent years preparing for this moment, a woman who had once worn that very same necklace, and whose secrets would soon change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Helen waited, her heart pounding with each passing minute. She had received another message from her mother. Meet me at the small cafe 2 blocks away. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Helen glanced at the ornate clock in the hallway. Ian had been gone for hours dealing with his business emergency, but she knew she couldn't simply leave without saying anything. That would only make things worse. With trembling hands, she wrote a quick note. Family emergency. Will return tomorrow morning. She left it on the kitchen counter where it would be easily found. The cafe was nearly empty when Helen arrived, the bell above the door chiming softly as she entered, and there, in a corner booth partially hidden by a large potted plant, sat her mother. Laura Parker looked nothing like the elegant woman in Ian's old photograph, but time had been kind to her. Her hair was now steel grey, her face lined with years of worry, but her eyes still held that same intensity that Helen remembered from childhood. Mother, Helen whispered, sliding into the booth. What are we going to do? Laura reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. It's time, Helen. I've spent years preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come, but preparing nonetheless. Why didn't you ever tell me the whole truth? I know the necklace belonged to someone named Maria, but that's all. Every time I asked, you would change the subject. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Because the truth was too dangerous. It still is, but now... She took a deep breath. Now you need to know everything, but not here. Come with me. They drove in Laura's modest car to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Laura led the way to a small unit, her keys jingling nervously in her hand. Inside was a single metal filing cabinet and several boxes, all carefully labeled with dates. This is everything, Laura said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. Every piece of evidence, every document, every photograph, the whole story of why Maria had to disappear. Helen's eyes widened. Mother, are you? Yes, Laura whispered. I was Maria. And Ian. Ian was more than just your employer. He is, your father. The world seemed to spin around Helen as she processed this revelation. All these years, all the secrets, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the mysterious phone calls her mother would take in private, it all suddenly made horrible sense. But why? Helen's voice cracked. Why did you leave him? Why did we have to live in hiding? Laura pulled out a stack of photographs and documents from the envelope. Because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know. Something about Ian's family business, about his father's dealings with dangerous people. When I confronted Nathan, Ian's father, he made it very clear what would happen if I didn't disappear. She spread several documents on a small folding table. Nathan Marshall had built his empire on more than just smart business decisions. He had connections with people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat to their operations. When I discovered the truth, I was pregnant with you. I couldn't risk your life, or Ian's. The only way to protect everyone was to vanish completely. Helen picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young Ian and Maria at some society event, both smiling, completely unaware of how their world was about to shatter. But Nathan is gone now, Helen said. He passed away years ago. Why didn't you come forward then? Because the people he was involved with are still out there. And now that Ian has seen the necklace, Laura's voice trailed off. He won't let this go, Helen finished. I've seen it in his eyes. He's been searching for you all these years. I know, Laura whispered. That's why we need to move quickly. There are people who still monitor Ian, who report any unusual behavior. If they discover who you are, who I am. She shuddered. A sudden noise outside the storage unit made both women jump. Laura quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into the envelope. We need to leave. It's not safe here. But as they turned to go, they found their exit blocked. Xavier, Ian's personal assistant, stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Marshall, he said quietly, addressing Laura. Or do you prefer Ms. Parker now? I've been following Helen since she left the mansion. I suspected there was more to this situation than a simple coincidence. Laura stepped protectively in front of Helen. Xavier, you were just a junior assistant when I left. I see you've moved up in the world. I've been protecting Ian's interests for years, Xavier replied, including keeping certain parties from discovering his continued search for you. But now, he glanced at his phone, now we have a serious problem. Ian's father may be gone, but his old associates are very interested in this development. Helen felt her mother tense beside her. You've told them? No, Xavier said firmly. Not yet, but they'll find out soon enough. They always do. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Laura studied Xavier carefully. Why would you help us? Because I've watched Ian suffer for years, thinking you abandoned him without reason. Because I've seen what the weight of his father's legacy has done to him, and because, Xavier hesitated, because I was there the night Nathan threatened you. I heard everything, and I've carried that guilt ever since. A car door slammed somewhere nearby, the sound echoing through the storage facility. Xavier quickly stepped inside the unit, closing the door behind him. We don't have much time, he said urgently. Ian is already on his way back to the mansion. When he finds Helen's note, he looked at both women intently. You have a choice to make, and you need to make it now. You can run again, disappear somewhere new, or you can trust me to help you face this head-on, finally end this cycle of fear and hiding. Helen looked at her mother, seeing the years of pain and sacrifice etched in her face. Then she touched the lotus necklace that had started all of this, feeling its familiar weight against her skin. I'm tired of running, she said softly. I'm tired of secrets. There has to be another way. Laura reached out and touched the necklace, her fingers trembling. I gave you this necklace because it was the only piece of your father I could safely share with you. I never imagined it would lead us here. Xavier checked his phone again, his expression grim. Whatever you decide, you need to decide now. Because in about 20 minutes, Ian will walk into that mansion, find that note, and move heaven and earth to find you both. And he won't be the only one looking. The three of them stood in the small storage unit, surrounded by boxes containing years of secrets and evidence, as the weight of the moment pressed down upon them. The choice they made in the next few minutes would change everything, for better or worse. What none of them noticed was the small red light blinking in the corner of the storage unit, a security camera silently recording everything. And in a darkened office across town, someone was watching with great interest, reaching for a phone to make a very important call. The truth about Maria's disappearance was about to explode into the open, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ian Marshall stood in his kitchen, Helen's note crushed in his trembling hand. The words, "family emergency," seemed to mock him, especially now that he'd received the preliminary report from Oliver about Helen's background. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. His phone buzzed. Another message from Oliver. Found address for Laura Parker. Sending now. Ian was halfway to his car when Xavier called. "Sir, wait. There's something you need to know before you go after them." "Not now, Xavier. I've waited years for answers. I'm not waiting any longer." "It's about Nathan," Xavier said quickly. "About why Maria really left." Ian froze, his hand on the car door. "What did you say?" "Meet me at the Golden Grove Cafe quickly. And sir, come alone. It's crucial that you're not followed." Across town, in the storage facility, Laura and Helen were quickly gathering the most important documents while Xavier kept watch. "We don't have much time," Xavier warned, checking his phone again. "Ian's on his way to meet me. That gives us maybe half an hour to get you somewhere safe." "No more running," Helen said firmly, touching the necklace. "Mother, we have to face this. Face him." Laura looked at her daughter, seeing in her face the same determination she'd once possessed herself. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. The people your grandfather was involved with are still dangerous, yes," Xavier interrupted, "but they're not invincible. That's what these documents prove, don't they? That's what you discovered all those years ago." Laura nodded slowly. "Evidence of money laundering, of partnerships with criminal organizations. Nathan threatened to hurt Ian if I didn't disappear. Said his associates would make it look like an accident. But you kept the evidence," Helen realized. "All these years, you kept it safe." "Insurance," Laura whispered, "in case they ever found us. But using it would mean exposing everything, destroying the company Ian worked so hard to build." Xavier's phone buzzed. "Ian's at the cafe. He's waiting for me." He looked at both women intently. "This is your chance. I can bring him here or arrange a safer meeting place, but you have to decide now." Helen stepped forward. "Bring him here. Please. No more hiding." Laura touched her daughter's shoulder. "Helen, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I'm sure, Mother. I want to know my father, and he deserves to know the truth." Xavier nodded and stepped outside to make the call. Laura and Helen sat among the boxes of their past, waiting in tense silence. Minutes stretched like hours until they heard footsteps approaching. The storage unit door rolled up, and there he was. Ian stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Laura. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, he spoke a single word, "Maria." Laura stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Ian, I'm so sorry." "Why?" The words seemed torn from his throat. "All these years, why?" "Because of me," a new voice said from behind Ian. Everyone turned to see Oliver stepping into view, his face grim. "Because I told her she had to go." Xavier moved quickly to stand between Oliver and the others. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "Follow you." Oliver smiled without humor. "I've been following all of you for years, keeping tabs, reporting back, just like Nathan asked me to, before he died." Ian's face darkened with anger. "You knew, all this time, you knew where she was." "I knew she was alive," Oliver corrected. "Knew she had your child. My job was to make sure she stayed away, to protect the company's interests. Nathan may be gone, but his old partners still have a lot to lose if certain information comes to light." "Information like this?" Laura held up the manila envelope of evidence. "Your partners should have been more careful with their paper trail." Oliver's hand moved toward his jacket, but Xavier was faster. In one smooth motion, he had Oliver pinned against the wall. "I wouldn't," Xavier warned quietly. "You don't understand what you're doing," Oliver spat. "To ask these people, they won't just let this go. They'll what?" Ian's voice was deadly quiet. "Threaten my family again. Try to take them away from me again." He stepped closer to Oliver, his eyes burning with years of pain and rage. I've spent years wondering why the woman I loved disappeared, years thinking she didn't love me enough to stay, and now I find out it was because of my own father, because of men like you. It was business, Oliver said weakly. Just business. No, Ian replied. It was my life, my family. He turned to Laura and Helen, his expression softening. Our family. Helen stepped forward, the lotus necklace gleaming at her throat. Father. Ian's eyes filled with tears as he really looked at her, seeing Maria in her features, seeing himself. Without a word, he opened his arms, and Helen stepped into them. Laura watched, her own tears falling freely. I wanted to tell you so many times when Nathan died. I almost came back, but I was afraid his partners would still be watching. They were, Xavier confirmed, still holding Oliver immobile. But they're not the only ones who've been gathering evidence over the years. He nodded toward his briefcase. I have my own insurance policy, enough to keep them away from all of you. Oliver struggled against Xavier's grip. Oh, you're making a mistake. These people, Ian cut in, are about to learn what happens when they threaten my family. He pulled out his phone. Oliver, you're going to make a call. You're going to tell your contacts that everything is fine, that this was a false alarm. Then you're going to disappear. If anything happens to my family, anything at all, every piece of evidence we have goes public. Understand? The color drained from Oliver's face as he realized his position. Slowly, he nodded. As Xavier led Oliver away to make the call, Ian turned back to Laura and Helen. We have so much to talk about, so much time to make up for. Laura touched his cheek gently. I never stopped loving you, never. I know, Ian whispered. I think I always knew. He looked at Helen, seeing in her face all the years he'd missed. Tell me everything, please. I want to know every detail of your lives. But as the family began their reunion, none of them noticed the small red light still blinking in the corner. And in that darkened office across town, someone was making their own plans. The truth about the past had come to light, but the future was still uncertain. The game wasn't over. It was merely entering a new phase. The soft glow of sunset filtered through the windows of Ian's private study, where three people sat together, decades of separation dissolving in a flood of shared memories and revelations. Helen watched her parents, still barely able to believe how much had changed in a single day. You used to sing this lullaby, Helen said softly to Ian. Mother would sing it to me every night when I was small. She said it was special. Ian's eyes filled with tears. My mother taught it to me. I used to sing it to your mother when we would sit in the garden at night. He looked at Laura, remembering. You remembered it all these years. I remembered everything, Laura whispered. Every moment we had together. I wanted Helen to have pieces of you, even if she couldn't know you yet. Xavier entered the study quietly, closing the door behind him. Oliver's been dealt with. He's on a plane out of the country, but we have another problem. He held up his tablet, showing a grainy security camera feed from the storage facility. The unit was under surveillance. Someone was watching everything. Ian's expression hardened. Can you trace it? Already did. The feed goes to an office registered to Nathan's old partner, James Sterling. Laura went pale at the name. Sterling. He was the worst of them all. The things I found in those documents about his operations. He's the one who told Nathan to get rid of me, isn't he? Ian's voice was quiet, but filled with anger. The one who really ordered you to disappear. Laura nodded slowly. He said he wouldn't just kill you, he would destroy you first. Ruin everything you'd worked for, make you watch it all crumble before having you eliminated. I couldn't let that happen. Helen reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. But now we have evidence against him. Surely we can use that. It's not that simple, Xavier explained. Sterling's smart. He's had years to cover his tracks, build legitimate businesses. The old evidence might not be enough anymore. Then we'll find new evidence, Ian said firmly. He's been watching us all this time. That means he's still involved, still hiding something. A soft knock at the door made everyone tense. Xavier moved quickly to answer it, relaxing when he saw it was just one of the house staff with the tea service. But as the maid set down the tray, Helen noticed something odd about the way she arranged the cups. Wait, Helen called out as the maid turned to leave. "That cup, you placed it differently than usual." The maid froze, her hand trembling slightly. Xavier moved swiftly, blocking the door. "Who told you to change the service today?" I just got a call," the maid stammered. "A man said if I didn't put something in Mr. Marshall's tea, they would hurt my family. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do." Ian examined the cup intended for him, his face grim. "Sterling's not wasting any time. He wants us to know he can reach us anywhere, even in our own home." Laura stood up, her face set with determination. "No more. I didn't spend years protecting our daughter just to let him threaten us now. We need to end this." "But how?" Helen asked, unconsciously touching her necklace, the symbol that had brought them all back together. Ian watched the gesture, and suddenly his eyes lit up with an idea. "The necklace. Sterling doesn't know its true significance. He thinks it's just jewelry, just the thing that helped us recognize each other. But it's more than that, isn't it, Laura?" Laura's eyes widened as she understood. "The pearl. I never told you, but that pearl isn't real. Nathan's private safe combination was hidden inside it. I discovered it by accident, the day I found all those documents. I always wondered why he never changed the combination after I left." "Because he never knew you had it," Ian finished. "And if he never knew, then Sterling doesn't know either," Xavier concluded. "And Nathan's old safe is still in his office at the company headquarters," Ian said, "untouched since his death. I could never bring myself to clean it out." He looked at his family. "Sterling's been watching us, thinking he has the upper hand, but we've had the key all along." Helen carefully unclasped the necklace, holding it up to the light. "All these years I wore it without knowing its true value, not just as a connection to you, but as protection against the very people who tore us apart." Xavier was already on his phone, pulling up building schematics. "The office is on the top floor. Security is tight, but I can get us in after hours. The question is, what do we expect to find in that safe?" "Nathan was paranoid," Laura explained. "He kept evidence against all his partners. Insurance, he called it. Things he could use to protect himself if they ever turned on him. Sterling's secrets would be in there too." Ian took the necklace from Helen, examining the pearl carefully. "We'll need to act fast. Once Sterling realizes we've figured this out, he'll try to stop us," Laura finished. "But he won't expect us to move quickly. He thinks he's dealing with a broken family, still reeling from revelations and reunions. He won't expect us to be working together already." Helen looked at her parents, seeing the years of separation dissolve in their shared purpose. "Then we use that. Let him think we're vulnerable. Let him think he's winning." A plan began to take shape as the family talked, each contributing their knowledge and strengths. Xavier's understanding of security systems, Helen's familiarity with the building from her time as a housekeeper, Laura's memory of the documents, and Ian's authority as company head. Together, they might have a chance. But as they planned, none of them saw the tiny red light blinking on Ian's desk phone, transmitting every word to interested ears. Sterling sat in his office, listening, a cold smile playing on his lips. He reached for his own phone, dialing a familiar number. "They're making their move," he said quietly. "Just as we expected. Get everything ready." The game was entering its final phase, and both sides were prepared to risk everything. But only one side knew all the players on the board, or so they thought. What no one realized was that the old maid, dismissed so quickly after her confession about the tea, had her own part to play. As she left the mansion, she pulled out a phone very different from the one Sterling had used to contact her. Her call was brief, but significant. "They're going after the safe," she said simply. "Tomorrow night." On the other end of the line, someone smiled. The pieces were falling into place at last. Night had fallen over the city as Ian's car pulled up to the Marshall Enterprises building. The family had spent hours perfecting their plan, but now, in the darkness, doubts crept in like shadows. "Are you sure about this?" Laura whispered, squeezing Ian's hand. "We could find another way." Ian looked at her, then at Helen in the back seat. "We've spent too many years letting fear rule our lives. No more." Xavier's voice came through their earpieces. "Security cameras are looped. You have 20 minutes before the next patrol. The family moved swiftly through the quiet building, Helen leading the way through service corridors she knew from her housekeeping days. The old maid had given her invaluable information about the night staff's routines, information that now seemed almost too perfect. As they approached Nathan's old office, Ian paused. Something felt wrong. "It's too easy," he murmured. Just then, the lights blazed on. James Sterling stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. "I couldn't agree more, Ian. Much too easy." Laura stepped protectively in front of Helen, but Sterling waved dismissively. "Oh, please, if I wanted to hurt any of you, I wouldn't be here myself." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I must admit I've been looking forward to this reunion for quite some time." "You've been watching us," Ian said, "all these years." "Of course. Nathan might have been weak enough to let his guilt consume him, but I'm not so sentimental. I knew Laura, would surface eventually. The necklace was a particularly nice touch. Very dramatic." Helen touched the necklace at her throat. "You knew about the pearl?" Sterling laughed. "My dear, I'm the one who put it there. Who do you think gave Nathan the idea for that little hiding place?" The family exchanged shocked looks as Sterling continued. "Nathan thought he was so clever, keeping evidence against all his partners, but he never realized he was doing exactly what we wanted, creating a single collection point for everything that could harm us. After his death, we just needed the right moment to clean it all up. And we provided that moment," Laura realized, "by coming back together." "Precisely. A happy family reunion, ending in tragedy when the distraught father, driven mad by revelations about his long-lost love, sets fire to his father's office, destroying everything inside." Sterling's voice was almost gentle. "It would have been a much neater ending than what actually happened to Nathan." Ian went rigid. "What are you saying?" "Your father's guilt wasn't just about driving Maria away, Ian. He was planning to confess everything, to expose us all. We couldn't allow that." "You killed him," Ian whispered. "The heart attack was helped along, yes. Just like your tragic accident would have been, if necessary," Sterling sighed. "But now we have a chance to write a different ending. One where everyone lives, where your family stays together, and where certain documents simply disappear." Laura stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" "Then the original ending stands, but this time no one escapes." Sterling spread his hands. "The choice is yours." A long moment of silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Helen began to laugh. Sterling frowned. "I fail to see the humor in this situation." "That's because you don't know about the 4th player in this game," Helen said, still smiling. She turned to the old maid, who had appeared silently in the doorway behind Sterling. "Would you like to explain, grandmother?" Sterling spun around as the maid stepped forward, her entire demeanor transforming. Gone was the servile posture, replaced by a regal bearing that commanded attention. "Hello, James," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." The color drained from Sterling's face. "Eleanor, but you're dead, in hiding. Just Nathan's estranged wife who conveniently disappeared after discovering her husband's corrupt dealings." Eleanor Marshall's smile was sharp. "I've been watching too, James, watching and waiting. And unlike my late husband, I was much more careful about where I kept my evidence." She pulled out a phone, showing a video of Sterling's earlier confession. "It's already been sent to multiple news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and corporate boards. Her fascinating story, how the great James Sterling orchestrated Nathan Marshall's death, then spent years terrorizing his family." The security guards exchanged glances, then stepped away from Sterling. "You can't," Sterling whispered. "Everything I built." "Will crumble," Eleanor finished. "Just like you planned for my son's life to crumble. The only difference is, you'll face justice rather than an accident." As if on cue, the elevator dinged, and Xavier emerged with several police officers. "Perfect timing," he said, smiling. "I believe Mr. Sterling has a confession he'd like to make official." As Sterling was led away in handcuffs, Eleanor turned to her family. "I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to be sure. Sure that you were strong enough together to face this, sure that Sterling would reveal himself fully. Ian stared at his mother, emotions warring on his face. All these years, I protected you the only way I could, Eleanor said softly. By staying away, by watching from the shadows. When Helen was hired as a housekeeper, I arranged it. When she and Laura needed warnings about danger, I sent them. I couldn't stop Sterling then, but I could keep you all alive until the right moment came. Helen hugged her grandmother tightly. That's why you helped me get the job here. Why you always seem to know so much about the family. And now, Laura asked, what happens now? Eleanor looked at her son, her daughter-in-law, and her granddaughter. Now we heal. Together. No more shadows. No more secrets. Ian wrapped an arm around Laura, pulling Helen close with the other. Together, he agreed. Months later, the Marshall family sat in the garden where Ian and Laura had once shared their dreams. The evening air was sweet with the scent of roses, and the lotus necklace gleamed at Helen's throat, no longer a hiding place for secrets, but a symbol of love that had endured against all odds. Eleanor watched her family from her favorite chair, contentment in her eyes. Sterling was facing justice, his empire dismantled. The Marshall Company was being rebuilt on honest foundations, with Ian and Helen working side by side to restore its reputation. But more importantly, the garden was filled with laughter again. Family dinners were no longer quiet, lonely affairs. Love had found its way home, proving that some bonds were truly timeless. As the sun set, Ian began to sing softly, the lullaby that had traveled through years and miles to keep a family connected. Laura joined in, then Helen, their voices weaving together in the gathering dusk. The lotus necklace caught the last rays of sunlight, its pearl now just a pearl, but somehow more precious than ever, for it had helped bring together 3 generations of Marshalls, proving that love, truth, and courage could overcome any darkness. And in the warm evening air, surrounded by the family she had waited so long to embrace, Helen finally felt complete. The mystery of her past had been solved, but more importantly, her future was full of promise, a future where she would never again have to wonder about the love that had given her life, that had protected her from the shadows, and that had finally brought her home. Thank you for watching this heart-stirring story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of the story. Also, click on the video appearing on your screen to continue the journey with us. See you in the next story.